Okay, we'll get started. Oop, can everybody hear me? Great. Welcome tonight. My name is David Van Zandt. I'm the president here at the New School. And welcome to this discussion of issues of higher education, in particular of higher education issues that affect tuition-based institutions. Tonight we're launching the fall 2012 issue of Social Research, an International Quarterly. It is devoted, the publication, to the proceedings of a conference we held about a year ago right here on the topic, the general topic of higher education. And tonight's program is a much more focused continuation of that discussion. At last December's conference, we talked about a number of issues, but one thing as we went through that process, we discovered was that the issues among different kinds of institutions really do differ pretty dramatically. We found that for the institutions, for example, that are elite institutions with very large endowments, they have one set of problems. Other institutions are state-supported, whether by state or state governments or sometimes local governments. They have a different set of issues. And finally, there are the tuition-based institutions, institutions that really rely to a great extent on tuition that their students pay them. They have a whole other set. And it's interesting because if you look at the financial crisis just a few years ago, and we're still in it, of course, it affected these different kinds of institutions in different ways at different times. So when the financial crisis first hit in 2008, it was the heavily endowed institutions, the large ones in the country, that suffered the most. They suffered because their endowment income went down. They had a lot of their investments locked up in types of investments they couldn't liquidate, and they actually had cash flow problems. They didn't have enough money to pay their bills, and many of them had to borrow quite a bit of money when their endowment values went down. The next group, though, to get hit were the state institutions, because as the crisis developed, state governments began to lose revenue, and they were looking for ways to reduce their budgets. And unfortunately, higher education is one of those areas that gets taken out faster than other areas. And then finally, most recently, in the last year and a half or so, it's been the tuition-dependent institutions that have been hit particularly hard. And that's come through the mechanism of enrollment in these institutions either falling or at least not growing to the extent the institutions had come to expect it. Again, what's happening is, well, probably individuals are really questioning, is higher education worth it? At least is it worth it at a private institution where they have to borrow a lot of money in order to pay the tuition bill? So this session is going to focus on those tuition-dependent institutions. Just as an example, the New School is certainly one of those institutions. About 90% of our operating budget comes from tuition and related student paid fees. And we've seen a flattening of enrollment and even decline in enrollment in a number of our programs. And again, if you look at the demographics, they don't look too good right now, because the numbers of the population that are in their 18 to 24-year-old period is flattening out. It'll, for a number of years, it actually dips coming up, but then it'll increase a little bit, but it doesn't have the kind of growth that we've seen in the past. There is, offsetting that, a growth in students coming from outside the United States here to take advantage of our higher education system. On the other hand, whatever growth there is in the domestic population is coming from either immigrants or from recently immigrated people, and they're coming from portions of the population that, at least historically, have not been as likely to undertake higher education. So these are real challenges, I think, that are facing tuition-dependent institutions, and we need to think very hard about what to do about that. How do we reinvent what we do to be more effective? There is a lot in the press. Every day you see something. There were 2 articles in the New York Times in the last couple of days about the cost of higher education, and one article was arguing, why do you even go to college? It's not necessary to go to college. Other articles have been arguing that college is far too expensive, that universities are way behind the times in terms of adjusting what they do. I think for an institution like ours and the other ones at the table, if you really wanted to be radical about changing what you're doing, you really have two choices. You can either really try to become a lower cost institution. We can ask our panelists, but the kinds of cuts that would take in terms of what we do today would be quite dramatic and draconian. We'd be very different institutions than what we look like today. And the other way to do it is to basically only focus on a small number of things you do well and do them very well and cut out. Don't try to be a multi-university. Don't try to be all things to all people, and really be focused. So. With that, we're going to go on to the discussion. This is we don't have prepared remarks. We're going to ask a number of questions, get a discussion going among the panelists, and then ask you if you would like to raise questions for the panelists. I would first, though, like to start with a couple of thanks. Professor Ariane Mack, Roberta Sutton, and the rest of their staff and collaborators are putting on this event under the aegis of the Center for Public Scholarship. The Center for Public Scholarship here at the New School is a university-wide center that bridges important issues and initiatives across the New School. And it hosts programming designed to promote freedom of inquiry, address pressing social issues, foster dialogue within and beyond the academy, and finally enhance public understanding of important social and political issues. Now, also, let me just introduce tonight's panelists very quickly. First of all, we have Stephen Friedman. Steve is the president of Pace University. He's been doing that since 2007. Prior to that, he was the dean of Pace Law School for 3 years. He has a professional background in both law and government, and he's extensive board service, including being on the board of the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities, the Alliance for Downtown New York, as well as on the Commission of Independent Colleges and Universities. Our second panelist, Robert Scott. He's fairly unique in higher education. He's held top positions at 3 major sort of vantage points on American higher education. He has been the head of a public institution. He's been the president of Delphi since 2000. He's been the head of a state coordinating board, leader of higher education coordinating agencies for both New Jersey and Indiana, and finally head of another university, the former president of Ramapo College. He's the former member and chair of the American Council on Education's Commission on International Education, and he's a member of the International Association of University Presidents. And then last but not least, we have with us Deborah Spar. Deborah is president of Barnard College. She's been in that position since 2008. She previously was at the Harvard Business School, where she was a professor of business administration and a senior associate dean for faculty research and development at Harvard. She is a major public figure on women in education, a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences. So with that quick introduction, I'm going to sit down and begin to ask our speakers some questions, and then we'll try to get that dialogue going. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. So. I think maybe I will start with the big question that many people in the press and otherwise ask is, do we need to throw out the current model and start afresh, or are there really ways that we can work around the edges to address these issues? Why don't we start? You want to start, Steve?
Sure. First of all, I take it when you talk about the threats to the current model, you're focusing on the economics of tuition-driven institutions rather than technology, which is a wholly separate set of threats. I think the answer is no. I don't think we have to throw out the model. But I think there are 2 things that have to be recognized. One is that there are significant but limited savings that I think all of us can realize through greater efficiencies. And, I mean, we have average small class sizes of 25 and under. Yeah. And I think increasing that to 35 or 40 doesn't change the nature of the education we provide. It's a very significant increase in productivity, which is a verboten word in higher education. So there are a whole lot of things like that. We can use our facilities better, a whole lot of things like that we can do, but there's a limit to those. The much more important thing in my mind is to recognize that The nature of higher education is such so that price increases at greater than the national average are inevitable. Those of you who read Bill Baumel's work on the cost disease, in which he associates higher education with health care, and basically what Baumel says is that the kind of productivity savings that we see in manufacturing simply aren't present in personal services. Technology will change some of that, but only in a limited way. Secondly, and then I'll stop, it's extremely difficult for higher education to do what most businesses do. Most businesses increase their revenues and increase their net income through productivity savings and through selling more products. So if you're General Motors, you want to sell more cars each year. Our analog of that is admitting more students, and there are simply limits on every institution's ability to do that. Demographic, the character of the institution, and where you happen to be.
But we just raised prices, though.
I mean, there's two ways General Motors can make more money: sell more cars or charge more for each car.
So they don't want to charge more for each car. There's a built-in bias in higher education toward price increases.
Yeah, right.
Deborah?
Well, to go to your question, I think it's very tempting to say throw the model out and start over. And in some ideal sense, yes, that's the right thing to do, but it's not going to happen. For many reasons.
Well, we're doing things, right?
Well, I mean, for many reasons, some of which are obvious and some of which are a little bit less so. I think, first of all, there's another way that businesses raise income, and that's they cut their costs. And we are very much like healthcare in the sense that we can't cut costs, or it's very, very hard to cut costs, because at least for our sector, the two biggest drivers of cost are faculty salaries and financial aid. And because we have this lovely thing known as tenure, we can't cut faculty costs, or it's very, very hard. You know, General Motors, as we know, turns around and fires people. We don't. Secondly, one of the things that the private education sector has done a great job of over the past 50 years is increasing financial aid. I think that's one of the best success stories in American higher ed. We are one of the few remaining redistribution mechanisms, because we take from the rich students or their parents, and we subsidize the students who can't afford to pay. And that's a great thing. But it's also driving our costs. And in fact, that's probably the biggest driver of costs right now that we don't like to talk about that much publicly. But unless we get rid of faculty and financial aid, we can't cut our costs. And we're not going to get rid of either of those things for the foreseeable future. So the model's not going to go away. The other thing, of course, that differentiates us from more normal industries is that our brands work in very funny ways. So some of you may remember when Coke came up with New Coke, and all of the old Coke fans sort of organized themselves to bring back old Coke. Well, imagine what would happen if Harvard said, we're going out of business and we're going to have new Harvard. The alumni would not react very well to that. So although we don't use the word very often in higher ed, we have very powerful brands, and our brands exist in the diplomas that our alumni carry, hopefully very proudly. That creates a huge vested interest against really doing anything significantly that would change the model. So I know you were asking the question to be provocatively. The model's not going to go away. What I think will happen, and this is some of the work that my former colleague Clay Christensen has done very intriguingly, is I think we are at real risk of being approached or encroached upon from what we consider to be lower value but lower cost educational models. So right now, online education is not yet very good, but it's suddenly getting a lot better. And as new models begin to compete with us, they will do what we do, I think, less well, but at a much lower cost. And that's where we are very, very vulnerable, but I don't think as a sector we're going to be able to be very nimble.
Well, I want to come back to the alternatives which Clay Christensen talks about and other people have talked about. But I just want to follow up on one point. You said that the model, this wonderful model where we subsidize, some people subsidize other people in the education. But one of the things, and I don't know if you saw this announcement recently, both Cornell and MIT announced that they just couldn't afford the level of financial aid they were handing out, and so are starting to convert some of their financial aid back into student loans. And the phenomenon, and a couple of other facts I want to throw out there, it may be that this model we've been following has reached this limit because the cost of tuition and the cost of attending has gotten so high that we have very few people at the top who are there to help subsidize people further down. Two other just quick examples, we were talking about this before, is that when you look at the number of full-pay students at most of our institutions, it tends to be very small and going down. And a second fact is, if you look out there, particularly for small liberal arts colleges, that we have, some of us are like that, the discount rate, we call it, which is the percentage of tuition that's returned as financial aid, has gone way over 50% and has been climbing as schools just struggle to, particularly small liberal arts colleges, struggle to keep enough students in there. So the model itself, while it's worked quite well, hasn't really reached its limit. Bob, I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, thanks very much, David, and thanks to everyone for coming out. First of all, I would point out that there are multiple models in American higher education. There's not a single model. When one thinks about, yes, our kinds of independent, relatively small-sized, moderate-sized private institutions, but just think about the well-endowed, the institutions, the large public research universities, the public regional universities, the smaller state colleges, community colleges, for-profit, military academies, specialized institutions. We have multiple models of higher education. So that's the first point. Second point, it seems to me that when thinking about the future and thinking about the financial structure, one has to look historically. Historically, going back to the Northwest Ordinance, in fact, 1787, through the land grant, through the Veterans Readjustment, the National Defense Education Act, an important source of funding for American higher education was, in fact, Congress. There was a public purpose to be served through higher education. Instrumental, no doubt, but also to support the liberal arts and sciences. Then we got to the point where the national purpose seemed to be direct loans, and we lost sight. So when we think about the financial model, or models, we have to think about the sources of funds over time in various ways. It's only been, and I think in some ways we've been hoisted on our own petard since about 72 in the Higher Education Act, when higher education people started talking about equating college education with jobs, that we turned it into a private gain instead of a public good. And that's what led principally to the various kinds of loans programs. So when we talk about model, we got to think about models. We ought to think about the variety of sources of revenue. And there are ways to be more productive. In fact, I think it's shameful that American higher education has about a, 40% graduation rate from baccalaureate programs? Yeah. I think for every one of our institutions, maybe not Barnard, but I suspect even Barnard, for every one of our institutions, we could increase our productivity by focusing on student success and student graduation. And if we used those lenses, or that lens, student success, for our reward structure and for our operating and capital expenses, we would find a lot of new ways to spend money that would be more effective.
Yeah, just first, a comment on Bob's comment about graduation rates. This just happens to be a hobby horse of mine. These are highly misleading numbers. In the first place, they include all of the students in large public universities that have essentially open admissions. So the dropout rate is naturally going to be very high. And secondly, it treats every student who transfers from an institution as a student who hasn't graduated. So if a student from Pace transfers to Adelphi, in Pace's numbers, it's treated as a non-graduate.
But even with the new statistics, we're not doing all that well. And I would say,
we need to do
for
better.
the institutions where there's high dropout rates, I would say that's not a good use of public money.
Well, not if they're transferring to another institution.
No, but your first point.
Yeah. There is another model which I think is important to keep in mind, which has really not been well explored in America, and that is essentially the model of European universities. Most European universities are essentially schools and nothing else. There's virtually no student life. There are virtually no teams. In many of them, there are no dormitories at all. They're large, urban classroom institutions. And those are, if you like, the brick and mortar analog of online education. So online education is essentially just education and nothing else. This is a brick and mortar local community version. But in Europe, it's often combined with quite high quality education, and that really hasn't been experimented with in the U.S.
David, why are we having this conversation? In large part, it's good to be self-reflective, and I think each of us do that in our own institutions in trying to do better. But in large part, we're having this conversation because the media have given attention to tuition and largely focus on those institutions that charge $50,000 or more. Our tuition is $29,000, under $30,000. And they focus on student debt. Our average student debt's about $28,000. And they use as the hooks for their stories students who graduate with $120,000 of debt, $140,000 of debt. I don't understand how that can happen, but that's one of the reasons we're having the conversation. It's about stories about high tuition. That doesn't cover everybody, and in fact, it's not even the average or modal, and on student debt.
Yeah. Well, but I think our focus here is on the tuition-dependent private institutions. So, yes, around the country, the average student debt graduating is reasonably low. But the problem is there are too many people out there, parents and potential students, who hear those stories and the idea of, and they see the sticker price on what we're doing, and they're worried, and they may, and I think we are seeing, I think it's the facts, we are seeing people start to hive off and go to the less costly state-funded institutions that are there right now.
And I think the media are always going to jump on sort of the exciting stories of the moment, but there's usually a grain of truth there, and I think there's a very important grain of truth here. Higher education is too expensive, and the sort of perhaps silly metric I use is when my dad went to college some years ago, he could earn enough money during the summer to pay full tuition, room, and board at the University of Vermont. Not the most expensive school in the country,
How
but
old's your dad? I did the same thing, so yeah.
no, that's right. We won't go there.
Yeah.
But he worked, as he told me, he worked as a camp counselor up in the Berkshires, and he could earn enough money doing that to pay for the University of Vermont. When he went to graduate school at Columbia, he then had to work as an elevator operator because he had to earn more money. But he could put himself through dental school through summer work. my bad line now is no kid can do anything legal right now during the summer and pay for a full year of college. It's impossible. And I crunched the numbers recently for a little piece I wrote in the Barnard magazine. You know, when I look at when I went to college, my parents on a comfortable but not huge salary could save enough money for my brother and me to go to college. Unless now you are in the 1%, you cannot either make enough money during the summer or save enough money during 18 years to afford to send your kid to school. That's a problem. It's a really big problem, especially for those of us, and I imagine it includes everyone in the room, who does believe that a college education is a really good thing to have. Statistically, it is what will enable people to move up in the workforce, but intellectually, it is what enables them to grow, to develop, to blossom. So as this good thing becomes increasingly expensive, I think it's a very real problem. And I think the media understandably will beat up those of us, and Barnard's among them, whose tuition is above $50,000. But I think the problem is more widespread. And we don't have an easy way to fix it because our costs are so baked in. And just one last thing, and then I'll stop. I think you put your finger on something really important. One of the other aspects that's driving up particularly undergraduate education, is that we are no longer offering anything close to just education. We are offering, we are caterers, and I know in my place we are vegan, nut-free, gluten-free, kosher, and halal, which adds to your cost. We have full mental health facilities, as we should. We are fully accommodating to all physical, emotional, and learning disabilities, which raises our costs. We have a full residential program, so every student can live on campus. We have multicultural advisors, deans, every kind of handholder you can imagine, which affects the student experience. It's what the students love, but it adds dramatically to our costs.
Yeah, right. Let's turn to exactly what we might be able to do. And so, Bob, maybe I'll start with you because you did mention you've been able to keep the cost down. And how have you been able to do that at Adelphi?
Well, we have a set of tests that we use in terms of deciding how to spend money and decisions to be made. We put the focus on the student success. That affects the way we spend money on facilities. So when we built, and we have built about 500,000 square feet of new facilities in the last 10 years, but we have very little debt, and we don't have a climbing wall. I mean, we focused on instructional purposes. We didn't build the 1,200-seat concert hall that some people wanted. We built it for 500 people because it's an instructional facility, and if the demand was for 1,000, we'd do it twice, not build for once a year. When it comes to rewards for release time or sabbaticals, we focus on what's going to be good for student success. So, and we, I guess that's the main reason, the main purposes. We have added over 200 faculty in the last 8 years, but we've still been able to keep our costs under control. Interestingly, when you were talking about institutions that rely on investment income, I think that was earlier, you were talking about Harvard at 37%. We have not spent a penny of our unrestricted investment income in 11 years because we want to build that, and it helps our credit rating. It also means we deny ourselves some funding, but we've been able to, so far, do that well. In the last 2 years, we've raised tuition 2% and 3%, and that's going to cause friction because it just didn't generate enough revenue.
Yeah. Even with inflation at that level. So you still have the problem of the cost outstripping inflation. Yeah. Steve?
Yeah, I think I think that over the next 10 years, the greatest force for savings are going to be technology. Now, I'm not talking about MOOCs, and I'm not talking about nationwide online programs, which is what the for-profits do. But I think almost for the first time, we're approaching a point where technology will truly change the pedagogy, will change the way we teach. And it seems to me technology has, there are three different modes in which technology is significant. One, when I went to college, certainly in my first couple of years, most of my courses were 2 large lectures by full professors and a very small precept. The only reason to put 125 or whatever it was people in a single room like this was that it was the only way to talk to them. There was really, if a course is a true lecture course with no interaction with a lecturer and really little or no interaction between students, there's no reason to gather everyone in a single room. And I think that over time there's substantial savings, and what we'll see is the transfer of large lectures to online lectures, which are recorded, which a student can listen to 3 or 4 times and listen to whenever they want to. Secondly, there is what is today the classic online program. We have hundreds, about 10% of our courses are offered to existing students online. And they're not all offered at the same time, obviously. But those are classic asynchronous courses in which a professor is working with students on virtually a one-to-one basis a lot of the time. Those are not cost-effective, and most asynchronous courses have a limit of about 25 because they're actually less effective than having everyone in the classroom. The third thing, which I think is the most interesting, is there have been a number of interesting experiments. Most interesting one is at Virginia Tech, in which some things are actually better taught by a computer without human interaction. And those are basically things that have to do with the basic application of rule systems. So what Virginia Tech has done is they teach a large part of the basic math curriculum for their engineering program in a facility that used to be a floor of Bloomingdale's in the Bankrupt Mall. It's filled with computers. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are faculty there about 10 hours a day to answer questions, but that's all they're doing. And the teaching is essentially done by a very good program that asks questions, and if you get the wrong answer, not only does the right answer pop up with an explanation of why it's correct, and the program takes you through, in very small steps, the learning process. Now, what this requires is that a faculty member takes something they may have been teaching for 30 years, and then anyone doing it for 30 years is not going to do this, and deconstruct it, and then ask themselves the question, I've got this packet of learning or information or skill, whatever, to deliver. What's the best way to do that? What can I do most effectively in the classroom? Because my own belief is that hybrid education, which is a combination of classroom and online learning, is really the future for schools like ours. So what can I do best in the classroom? What can I do best with a computer all by itself? What can we do best online?
At the same time, increasing the average class size.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Do you have thoughts
But
on that?
maybe not for the classroom discussion.
Yeah, okay.
So just a couple of other things to throw out. I think one of the things we need to start seeing more of is cooperation among colleges and universities. Over the past 10, 20 years, there really has been an arms race in higher ed. And we are spending, again, as a sector, an awful lot of money competing with one another to get students. We're not allowed to collude because we are governed by antitrust regulations, but a little bit of cooperation along the line is going to be critical. Barnard already has some of that. We're very lucky with Columbia. So we don't teach Arabic. Our students can take Arabic. They take it at Columbia. Columbia undergraduates take architecture at Barnard. So you're getting a division of labor and a division of resources in a really efficient way. The 5 colleges in Western Massachusetts are doing this. There's the California Consortium. I think this is the way of the future, particularly in some things like languages. We want our students learning Arabic and Hindi and Urdu, but not every single college has to have a fully staffed Urdu department. Some of this can move online. A lot of it can be done consortially. I think we're also going to have to think about, and this is totally verboten within our world, but some way of thinking about, if not measuring, faculty productivity. Once upon a time, we could afford to have faculty teaching very esoteric subjects that were of interest to 2 or 3 students in a grade. We can't do that anymore. We're going to have to think about making sure that faculty are teaching certain numbers of students, certain numbers of graduates. And over time, we're going to have to start capping the growth in faculty sizes, because most of us have seen our faculties go up and our students not go up. We're going to have to reverse that. And then finally, and I think you're starting to see some interesting experimentation along these lines, we probably need to start playing with the 4-year summers off model. Wesleyan has launched a very innovative 3-year model. Can you use summers? I love the idea of taking students coming out of the community colleges and having them transfer. We can work out the data problems to 4-year colleges. We also might think about, as thankfully, hopefully, we all get older and healthier, it may be that 18 to 22 is not the only time of your life when you go to college. Maybe you get certain pieces of your education when you're 18 to 22, and other pieces when you're 42 and 62 and 82. That will create revenue streams and also very interesting life patterns that we've only just started to play with.
Good.
I'd like to merge my football team with Barnard's.
No comment.
Well,
We're undefeated, we like to say.
Yeah, we certainly make use of the partner. In fact, with Columbia, we have 3 programs that partner with between physics, computer science, and math, and Columbia's School of Engineering. We also cooperate with Hofstra and St. John's in offering the Doctor of Audiology. But you touched on class size. One of the ways to gain efficiency is not only to monitor class size and to monitor what courses are offered when and how often and by whom, but also to look at classroom efficiency. An awful lot of classroom buildings being constructed because of the Monday, Wednesday, Friday scheduling issues. If we were to look at high utilization of classrooms, we could probably reduce some capital costs. We certainly have. But with regard to technology, and Steve, I wonder to what extent those activities are going to reduce costs. Technology is, in fact, a great cost sink. But it's essential as an enhancement to students' undergraduate and graduate education. They need the tools, they need the experience, and a combination of blended as well as online. I've been thinking about, because of all the discussion about MOOCs, I've been thinking a lot about online education, and I think about it in 3 ways, 3 dimensions. We are providers, and we now have 3 or so degree programs online. We're developing others, mostly for graduate programs. Right. So provider, partner, we're talking with a couple of the firms that have received some notice to help us in the development of some other programs that would, again, master's programs that would be online for a larger audience. This will help our faculty. It'll also help enrollment, but it'll help the faculty in developing new expertise in these programs. The third dimension is that of receiver. We are going to be, I mean, Harvard may not offer credit for the MOOCs, but the ACE will, or now Antioch University will, and I suspect we'll have students from high school applying for freshman admission presenting some MOOC classes, or our own students will take a MOOC on the side. And I think that the online is going to give us the capability of doing what Deborah just suggested about the three-year degree, because this will allow students to study in the summer and still work.
Well, yeah, I thought what you were going to say, Bob, is that MOOCs are really just another form of partnership.
Yeah.
So that it's not only a question of accepting credits from a student who on her own or his own has gone and taken a MOOC, but I think there are opportunities for integrating courses from Stanford and MIT into our own curriculum, combining it with some classroom of our own in those courses, and paying them for it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that probably many people in the audience are thinking right now is saying, well, whatever happened to that idyllic Socratic class with the, learning from the professor, which is sort of the traditional liberal arts model. Are we really headed down a road where we're going to lose a lot of that?
I think it's still there. I mean, I think in most undergraduate courses, a lot more goes on in the classroom than a Socratic dialogue. So some of it is making sure that students have mastered the underlying substance. That's the kind of thing, and some of it is straight lecture.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So those things, it seems to me, admit of using technology on a broader scale. And what I find attractive about that model is that it inevitably forces a faculty member to ask himself or herself, okay, using this classroom as a precious resource, now how can my students get the most out of it? How can I really use this wonderful opportunity to increase the depth and breadth of their learning?
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I think the 20 students in a seminar model is the ideal. Mm-hmm. Not for every class, not for every kid, but for many people, it does remain the ideal. And I think it can be preserved, but it can only be preserved by cutting some of the other things out of the package. I think your point on timing is critical. We can teach idyllic 20-person seminars on a Friday morning, which somehow has fallen off the academic calendar, so far as I can tell. But we should probably revive Friday mornings. We might even think about Saturday mornings, heaven forbid.
Absolutely.
We might have to take away some of the other stuff that isn't, in fact, part of what we all imagine when we think of that idyllic liberal arts seminar. And I think, and I know this is, if any of my faculty are here, they will hate me for saying this, or if you tell them, but we also have a lot of classes, we in the sector, that are idyllic seminars of 2 and 3 people. Those are things we probably can't afford, except for some particular cases. But just by making sure we're moving up to 20 people, I don't think you lose any moving from 5 to 20. You definitely lose something going from 20 to 100. But again, I'm sure every person in this room remembers sitting in a lecture hall with
where's the
100
magic
people.
number? 35?
It depends on the nature. It depends on the nature of the course. I mean, I spent most of my career at Harvard. Michael Sandel teaches a course on justice that gets 500 students every year, and it is one of the most powerful intellectual experiences.
He just told me he had 1,000 students.
He's got a lot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't affect the intellectual power of that course. Most people can't command an audience of 500 people. But that's where we have to start thinking about, where do we get impact by having 500 people with good TAs? Where do you want 20? Where do you want 2 on a Saturday morning? And looking at the nuts and bolts of it all.
Okay. All right.
Well, I read once that, I think it was in the third century, the Babylonian Talmud in the 3rd century said that after 20 students, one should start another section. So this is a time-honored tradition. Listen, I think the focus has to be on the character of the student experience, the student success, and that includes the number of students. And if we have fewer than 6, let's do an independent study. It's not going to be a regular class. But just back on the main, so I don't want to give up the character of the liberating education that I think we provide, liberating students from their provincial origins, no matter what their station or place of origin or whatever. But to get back on the major point about costs, a couple of things occurred to me. I think we are either Division II or III athletics, right? Because I know we are.
We're.
Yeah. Athletics is a, you're what?
We're the least athletic of all the schools ever, ranked. I mean, we do have a basketball team that
Yeah.
plays.
But
actually plays
athletics
pace, I
is
think.
a huge source of expense. We are in Division II, not Division I. Our neighbor Hofstra gave up Division I football because of expense. I think Division II is really an ideal situation. Division III is great as well. But athletics is an area, and I think when Steve was talking about European countries where communities offer activities that surround the university, athletics is one of those. The other is in terms of administration, my fellow administrators. We benchmark expenses against some other institutions. I recently looked at a report on this. An institution in our region, and we compared the total expense for the top 18 administrators for Adelphi compared to others, and one nearby has almost 4 times the expense in that top 18 as we do, including 3 vice presidents doing the job of 1. So we do control administrative functions, the assistant dean level, et cetera, and that is an area of huge cost. Some of the costs have been imputed or encouraged and required because of compliance requirements, federal and state, et cetera, but there are ways of controlling them, and it's an area that needs to be looked at more generally.
What do you do about, though, someone mentioned the student driven cost. You mentioned regulation, which is one thing, but in a competition, whether it's a climbing wall or other kinds of services that students have come to expect, students and their families have come to expect, how do you control that?
Well, some we can't, because in meeting federal compliance requirements, we have to provide extra services, and we are not allowed to charge for them.
Yeah. But the more discretionary things,
Right.
we do a lot of discretionary things in the terms of the kinds of events we hold, the kinds of food we may serve. The problem is if we start to cut back on those, or just even the quality of the buildings, if we start to cut back on those, you get a bad rap, and the students are less likely to come, and we're highly tuition dependent, and we can't afford that in the long haul.
Well, it's partly a matter of the of the strength of the school's reputation, and the stronger the school's reputation as an academic institution, in part, the less you have to invest in these other things. Now, if you're Stanford and Harvard and Princeton
They
and
invest
Yale
in all that stuff anyway, right?
competing with each other, they all have the same reputations and they have a major arms race. But I think for many institutions like mine, as the reputation increases, the importance of some of these other things decreases.
I would say for us, we're relatively top-heavy, and particularly in student services, because that is, we are known as a place that does deliver a lot of individual attention to the students, and it's very hard, it would be very hard for us to move away from that. Having said that, I found it really useful to ask the students, to make the students aware of the fact that, these budgetary times are tough. Which of the student services do they use the most? If we have a whole office that no student's ever heard of.
Have you done that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I haven't done it formally. I've done it with the student finance groups. I do it with students in my office hours. And the students have, I think, a much better sense than the administrators do of what are the services that they're actually getting, and what are some of the services that they might be able to do on their own. I mean, I think, again, if we, think about how college has evolved since all of us were there, there's a lot of student activities that the students used to do themselves that we're now doing for them. And that would be an area.
We all have a great, well, at least the three of us at this time, I don't, it may be a little different from Adelphi, but we're in the middle of a great city where there's all sorts of things. If we were out in the countryside someplace in an isolated campus, then you really are, that's not an option for some of these
We're
schools.
37 minutes from Midtown by train, so.
That's the country, right?
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how that students can't walk very far these days anymore. So that's a
Actually, yes, we do spend a lot. We certainly should not do things we shouldn't be doing, and I meet with students frequently, formally and informally, and ask what's going well, what do you wish we had done differently last week? But I think that the core student services are highly correlated to student success and retention. It's the out-of-class learning.
yeah. Sorry.
I think a very dramatic example of that, David, is merit aid, which is most financial aid. At many institutions has two components. There's financial aid offered because you're an attractive student, and then there's need-based financial aid. And this is essentially, it's become a competitive factor. So we end up offering merit aid to students in Greenwich, not because they need it, but because we're concerned that someone else is going to offer them merit aid, and that someone else does offer them merit aid. So it's an example of competitive forces really wasting money, I think.
Yeah. No, we're just discounting the tuition on a selective way. Let me get to one last set of questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. And I think we've touched on these already, but there are certainly mooted out there lots of different alternatives to the model that we have. And one attribute of the model we have is that you do, whether it's an undergraduate school or a master's program, you do a certain number of years and get a degree. All right, and then that degree has some value somehow in the marketplace. But, there's a lot of talk now about do-it-yourself, education. Badges has become a popular topic. We've talked a little bit about the MOOCs. There's outfits such as, Khan Academy, General Assembly that are really offering the ability to put together an education. Are those real threats to what we do, or are they just a fad, or are they an adjunct to what we do? Who wants to jump in on that one?
Go ahead.
Go, Deborah.
I'll take a first shot. I think they're real, and I think they're important, and I think we ignore them at our peril. I was saying at a Seven Sisters meeting last week, I think one of the things we as a sector have to do is, it's very easy. These badges sound silly. It looks like Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. You get little digital badges that you put in a digital backpack. So it's very easy to sort of disdain them. But if we start to see over 3 to 5 years whole numbers of people getting badges in coding, in digital media, in things that we don't offer, I think we have to take that as a warning sign. I think we should watch the hunger and watch the things that people are trying to learn and make sure that those are things we're teaching, or at least thinking about teaching. And I think we do, particularly in my part of the sector, we have to maintain a very vigilant balance, because part of our job as an elite liberal arts college is to teach students things that they don't think they want to know. We want to teach the pre-med students Victorian poetry, and we want to teach the Victorian poets chemistry, even if they don't want it. That's part of what we do, and it's the beauty of what we do. By the same token, we can't let ourselves get too removed from the marketplace. And we have to make certain that our students who are graduating with degrees in Victorian poetry can eventually get jobs. And
One of the appeals of that do-yourself badge system is that it actually, people think it increases their job chances. We really haven't talked about outcomes yet, but.
Yeah, but there have been badges for decades. I mean, Microsoft, all the computer companies have been issuing certificates, badges for people to show that they are qualified, certified to provide services and go to work in various kinds of industries. There are employers who've been using those. This is not new, but maybe it's coming closer to home. When you said do-it-yourself, DIY, I actually had to ask my wife on Sunday what it meant, because in that New York Times article about students deciding that they don't need to go to college and is college necessary, it referred to it, and then, yes. What I found fascinating about that article, which focused on students who found that they didn't want college in order to do what they wanted to do, was the reasons they offered. Large classes in which they were anonymous, and they didn't want that. A campus scene which focused on binge drinking. Irrelevant requirements that seemed to have no purpose and had no explanation. Athletic programs that focused on what the student said was one and done. In other words, basketball players recruited to win a game and then quit after the semester because that's all they could do. And those point to things that we can do better, and we are doing better, and we ought to learn from that. Now, certainly there are people for whom college is not the right route, and they don't need it at that time, and they can come back later. But I think for most people of college-going age, the kind of environment, the kind of education, the kind of purpose that we serve enriches them. And what I say to students and parents is, don't worry about what you study. Study that for which you have a passion. If it's dance, dance. If it's philosophy, philosophy. It's up to us to organize our alumni and employers in the area to create internships and bring people onto campus to talk about careers and to bring you to internships or help you find internships to get that real world experience, because the focus is on student success.
I'm about to make a lot of enemies, I think. Yeah, if you talk to people in the for-profit education world and apostles of online education, they take the notion of disruption to the ultimate degree, and what they predict is the same impact on traditional higher education that technology has had on, say, publishing, or indeed Amazon is having on retail marketing. I don't believe that. On the other hand, I do believe in the basic analytical framework that Clayton Christensen proposes, and my perception is that higher education as a group, and particularly the faculties, have their head in the sand on this issue. And the danger to me, so it seems to me perfectly clear that these forces are going to work significant changes in higher education over some period of time. It's not going to be 5 years, it may be 10 or 15 or 20, but at some point in 10 or 15 years, it's going to look different. My concern is that we collectively will keep our head in the sand too long, because we need now to start thinking about what this means for us. It will mean something different for every sector of higher education, and it'll mean something different from institution to institution. But if you don't think about it and don't start experimenting and adapting, you're going to go out of business.
Well, maybe we could, one last question. Do you expect to see a much smaller number of universities and schools in this, colleges in this country going forward?
Well, I think that and a lot of this depends on the economy, but I think that small colleges have got to be under enormous pressure, and it's particularly true of small religiously affiliated colleges because the churches have their own financial constraints and have been withdrawing the subventions they've been providing.
Good.
So I'm surprised actually there haven't been more failures already.
Yeah.
Small colleges.
2 points, if I might. One is that whenever I hear about Christensen or somebody else, I just wonder, well, where do you want your kids to go to school?
His daughter's in Barnard, by the way.
Point made, point made. But the second is,
I'm not sure.
of course there'll be change. I mean, just think about the 20th century. In 1900, 4% of high school age students went on to higher education. We had the creation of community colleges, a dramatic change. And earlier, of course, the land grant and engineering. The mass education. There will be dramatic changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, why don't we open it up to questions from the audience? I don't know if we have a microphone right here, but what's that? Oh, there's a microphone right
And over here,
right in the
too.
middle. Yeah, so if you'd like to just come up to the microphones, we can. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to commend everyone for the breadth of everything you've hit. I was trying to figure out whether you were really going to cover all of this, and you did. However, the purpose and the model are two different domains. And the model is, should we figure out how to keep what's going on? And the purpose that you've been talking about is how do you make sure that the students meet their final objectives? And it seems to me that there's a larger purpose, which is what's good for society and what should this society be actually reaching? And in relation to that, what I would like to know is, what do you think is the true purpose of education for our society? And would you even bother to keep universities around if you were trying to meet that particular objective? Or would you, in fact, get rid of it right as soon as possible and move to some better approach to actually meeting that purpose?
Great question. Pulling us to a real philosophical level. So anybody want to grab
My motto and theme is that we are as much about character and citizenship as we are about careers and commerce.
I'll add on that. I think there's two major objectives. I think, particularly in the United States, the higher ed sector has been the pathway to opportunity for all Americans, whether they be veterans, immigrants, first-generation families. We are the way to the American dream, and I think we have to keep that foremost in our minds and be flexible enough to say if there's a better way to offer those opportunities, we should move towards it. And the other is just to echo what Robert just said. I think we have a moral responsibility to help create educated citizens. And I'm not sure we have the most educated citizens in the world right now.
Included in elective office.
Yeah, as you know, a former economist, I don't know how we get Congress to deal with some of our budget issues if citizens don't understand what a budget is. I think we have a responsibility to offer that kind of education. And maybe we do it online, maybe we do it on video screens, but we've got to do a better job of it.
One thing, though, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I'm a product of purely liberal education. It influences me to this day. On the other hand, I think this debate contains a kind of false dichotomy in which people say, well, are we a trade school? You're either a trade school, and implicitly you're teaching plumbing, or you're teaching critical thinking and independent thought. I think that's has a significant error. I mean, for myself, my experience in law school was an explosive, now maybe I was a late bloomer, but it was an explosive intellectual experience for me, in which I thought more independently and more critically than I ever had at Princeton. So the fact that a school has an orientation toward teaching professions is not inconsistent with the notion of teaching critical thinking and independent thinking.
That's the role of general education.
I mean, just one point I'd make is that in talking about the philosophy behind higher, nobody's mentioned research. And I mean, I think if you asked a lot of people, they would say the great contribution of American higher ed has really been in the creation and advancement of knowledge. Is that something that only certain universities do, a certain class of type of university do? That's really not our mission at all?
Oh, sure it is.
Okay. All right. Well, just something that, let's get another question here.
Well, thank you for very interesting discussion. I have a question. In the academic year of 2011-12, there have been more than 760,000 international students in the United States. And the question is, how much significance do you put into recruitment of international students and international students in general as a way to expand student body and gain revenue from tuition? Thank you.
Anybody want to?
Well, I think there's both a supply and a demand side to this. I think the demand abroad for American education, and particularly for liberal arts education, really does speak to the beauty of the model. I'm not a huge booster of the United States in all sectors. I think U.S. does higher education better than anyone else out there right now. So I think the fact that as families in India and China and Malaysia are generating wealth, the first thing they want to do is give their kids an American education. I think that speaks well of our sector, and I think it speaks well of their goals. I don't think that's a forever situation. I think they're going to start building their own colleges, and we're going to see the demand side start to flatten out. At the moment, yes, international students are a source of revenue for many American schools. At mine, they're relatively small as a percent of the overall population. But I think they also, if one can be instrumental, they serve another purpose. And that is, we live in an increasingly globalized world. That trend is, I don't think, going to reverse itself. I think we owe it to our American students to make sure that they're interacting with non-Americans during their college years. And so the international students serve an additional purpose in terms of internationalizing our undergraduate student body.
Yeah, certainly it's true that there are some colleges that are relying on international students for revenue. That's not our case. In fact, we have scholarships for international students. We have, and depends on the year, anywhere from students from 50 to 60 different countries. Many students from China now, and we're trying to encourage them to study something other than business. But I think they add to the richness and lifelong friendships.
Questions?
I've heard you talk a lot about the current state of education and the profitability of it, but my question is, what is, do you think, in the modern age, the purpose of education? I mean, if, like with Virginia Tech, a computer really can teach people these sort of basic, lower-level skills, and perhaps not as well as a college, but to an extent that they can learn, like biology or math, really just at their own computers, is a liberal arts education that can allow you to learn the skills to research and think for yourself more or less valuable in that climate? I mean, should we be offering just liberal arts now that people can get the sort of non-liberal arts for themselves?
I mean, I could, just a factoid, I think I have this number right, but if you look at all the students in four-year higher education, undergraduate, it's a tiny percentage. I'd heard 5% that are in liberal arts colleges of the kind, residential liberal arts settings. So the vast majority of people who are in, four-year institutions are not. I mean, they may be commuters. It may be a much more professionally oriented kind of education than we do now. So, but that was just sort of a fact I wanted to get out there.
I don't know. I think the purpose of college is to help create effective citizens. Now, you can create people, and that has to do with mindset, skills, approach to learning. It also, I think, an important function of higher education is preparing people for professional careers. I mean, most people graduate either from college or graduate school with some orientation. We tend to assimilate the sciences with liberal arts, but really being trained as a life sciences biologist is very clearly professional training. So there's nothing infra-dig about this. There's nothing lower class about training to be an accountant. But the liberal arts component of that undergraduate education is really essential. And it's essential to creating an effective, happy, contributing human being. It's also essential to creating a really good accountant.
Who may be a happy, well-functioning human being.
Yeah. I think that's a great question. The whole idea of flipping, people now are talking about flipping in the sense of the online takes the place of the lecture, and then you meet in small groups to discuss. I think of education in terms of knowledge, both expert and general, knowledge, skills, abilities, and values. And it's the skills that are the most amenable to the interaction online and through technology. But we need that classroom interaction, it seems to me, for reflection, for deepening understanding, to understand what it is to learn in a group, which is what we do throughout our lives.
Question?
I wanted to thank you all for your presentations and dealing with these issues, and also having outstanding schools. I've been to many of your programs and different ones in different areas. Why do we have so much problems in creating cooperative models, whether it's between schools or the idea also of, from a personal perspective, or not just a personal perspective, representing a mental health education NGO at the UN for some time, and having a student who's just graduated from undergraduate, not being able to get a job, and wanting to go to graduate school, and the cost issues. How important it is, the idea of higher education and cooperatively developing models, particularly with this multicultural New York City environment, which every place is in every place in the world, and the idea of, as you touched, so many of the ideas you touched upon, but the idea of not just having for undergraduates, also for people who are continuing, and whether ethics and business. We did something at UN on the ethics after 2008. How did we ever get this far, developing the brightest? And there's a narrow sense of accountability, really bringing us the better world, and agreeing with you that human capital and enjoyment of life are critical issues. But and also working out a model for higher education with for high schools, which have so many problems, hospitals, healthcare, and communities, a community value, and the ability to get grants should be, as well as government grants. Why can't we work on some of those things?
So the question is, why can't we work together more across the institutions?
Together more in terms of new models, including with the religious communities, including that we can talk with each other. The New York City Interfaith is a group that I work with, as well as a Coalition of Mutual Respect.
Yeah.
The Vatican II, with Jewish Catholic model, is also in our time.
Well, let's see if we get an answer to the question, okay?
Okay.
Why is it so hard? I mean, is it just we're sort of innately competitive, or we were rewarded by our boards because they say, we want you to be the best or whatever?
Well, it's easy to beat up on it, but one of the most invidious things that has hit our sector is U.S. News and World Report. All right, so if we were competitive to begin with, that has just upped the ante. It sounds silly, but it's hugely important. We are within, certain, slices of the sector. We are we are being structured in a way that we are competing with one another. And it's very hard to push back on that. Also within the Ivy League part of the sector, we're actually, we are under a standing court order that we are not allowed to collude. Now, there's probably ways that can be reimagined going forward, but we are not allowed to collude on certain things. And in ways that, you know, you go into certain meetings and you have to sign pieces of paper saying what you will not talk about. So that certainly doesn't help.
Is this in a global
I also
market?
think I think it's very countercultural for faculties.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that attracts people to an academic life is the unusual amount of control that faculty members have over what they do, and they have really quite an extraordinary amount of control and autonomy. Any sort of cooperation, including interdepartmental and interschool cooperation, within a single university, is a challenge to that. I think at Pace, for example, our faculty has come a long way, but it has a really long way to go still. And doing it with another university is even more challenging.
Right. Yeah. Does the government have a role to play there? I mean, certainly government is heavily involved in higher education, and I think rightly so, because it's an investment in the infrastructure of the country. You know, I'm quite fearful that with the fiscal cliff, that some of the changes we've made in the financing of higher education are going to cause some real problems as people pull back, but other people have different views about what will happen in the budget discussions. But I mean, government plays that role throughout the world.
Yeah, I think the thing that we're all most worried about right now is making sure that government maintains its commitment to financial aid, because without the Pell Grants, we're all going to be and our students are going to be in big trouble. And I think your point's a really interesting one. There may be a very innovative role for government, particularly at the regional level, to kind of force collaboration and force more consortial behavior. It's a good point.
The, we should not ignore the fact that in New York, and I know in other states as well, there are opportunities for universities to work together in terms of libraries, information systems, and purchasing. Everything but the central issue of the curriculum and the faculty. That's up to us so far. Right.
I had a follow-up to the comment about the purpose of the university being creation of an educated citizenry. Increasingly, it's obvious that the two main challenges of our century are climate change and finite planetary resources. Many universities have environmental studies programs, but fall short in terms of mainstreaming sustainability throughout the curriculum. And this mainstreaming effort will require new interdisciplinary approaches with regard to both research and teaching. And how do you see a new model for education in the 21st century that would address these questions, both in terms of the education, plant operations, you could achieve savings through efficiencies and conservation, and the third would be endowments. 350.org recently launched an initiative calling on investors, pensions, universities to divest from fossil fuels, to stabilize in the first year and then divest within 5 years. How would you address that question in terms of the role that universities must play in creating a sustainable economy? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point, and if my point about the government needs to invest in higher education for the infrastructure of our country, or of our economy, of the world, I think that's important. But I would say that I think that universities, without dramatic change in their structure, are actually at the forefront of, they're doing the science behind various environmental questions. I think they are leaders in many places now in terms of just making environmentally friendly facilities and that kind of thing. Now, we could do better. We could certainly do better. But I'm not sure there's a dramatic change needed. We need to keep training life scientists. We need to keep training policy makers who have a view of that. But I think we're doing a pretty good job right now.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, David, is one thing we're doing is we have significant environmental programs in various schools throughout the university. And what we've done is created an umbrella institution to bring all of those together so that, we're not there yet, but so that a student in this center, in effect, will be able to take courses in environmental science, environmental policy, in the law school, environmental informatics from the computer science school. The business school has a variety of environmental programs. The nursing school does. And it's a way of providing tremendous depth and breadth to the program.
I think of it in this way. We're a teacher, actor, and partner. We certainly teach in terms of environmental science and environmental studies. 100% of our electricity comes from alternative sources. All of our housekeeping, groundskeeping work is done with organic materials. And we have 3 large geothermal fields, the first or second of which was the largest on the East Coast. And then as a partner, we work with 18 other colleges and universities on monitoring our carbon footprint and some other measurements.
Right. Okay. So,
Okay. We've all noticed that over the past 30 years that the 1%'s income has increased dramatically against the 99%. Is it something where universities, since you are tuition-based, would you lobby against tax reform where the 1%, maybe look into the 1% tax reforms so the GDP can go back to the 99%, thus putting more money into the rest of the country's pocket for them to pay for tuition-based schools?
I just signed a statement by the Committee on Economic Development. Actually, it's a draft at this point, but I will sign it. Some revisions, and one of the things that I think we should get rid of are the tax credits for college, because it's giving money to people whose kids would go to college anyway, and denying money to go to people who need it. So that's a tax change.
Okay.
yeah. Go on.
I mean, I don't know that it's our role to enter the taxation policy debate so much, because it's not our area of expertise as institutions. But just speaking personally, I think the increased disparity of income in this country is one of the greatest problems we face. It's a social problem, it's an economic problem, and if we're not careful, it's going to become a much greater political problem.
Yeah.
So hopefully they'll do the right thing over the next few weeks.
I mean, tax expenditures are just another way for the government to spend money. The government can spend money by spending it directly, by channeling it through the states, by providing loan programs, programs through banks, and providing either credits or deductions. All of those have a somewhat differential impact, and I think everyone's view is we have too complicated and too special interest-oriented a tax code. So from a tax policy point of view, the principal objective really should be simplification. And I think that money is more effectively spent. The advantage of a deduction, like the charitable deduction, is basically plurality. It's the power of plurality and multiplicity. So it supports a whole variety of different kinds of institutions. But in terms of targeting money is much more effectively spent when it's direct.
Let's have one last question, and then we'll close it up.
Appropriate. I wanted to thank you all very much for a very exciting panel. And I'm not just saying that as a participant, but because I'm the conference blogger. So, so please answer my questions carefully.
As if we weren't
We're
already.
good already, yeah.
Answer. He's on. So you get the first crack. You could speak to the field of the digital humanities. Because it seems that we're watching a sub-branch of humanities emerge, which is based on technology and its ability to improve scholarship, which connects research with teaching, which is perhaps the most collaborative aspect of the humanities I've ever
Goodness.
It's the effect of technology.
Of digital the field of digital humanities.
I think that probably, if it didn't start, one of the earliest initiatives was the Shakespeare Concordance, supported by, I think, Mellon Foundation. Mellon has continued its support of the use of technology to help us do research and understand various fields of literature and history.
I think this is one of the most exciting developments out there. I think we're in the very early stages now. I don't think we've yet, or at least I haven't seen any examples of anyone really taking full advantage of the technology to do something different in the humanities, but we're right on the cusp. We have a program at Barnard that 100 schools now participate in called Reacting to the Past, where we teach history by giving people original texts and then roles. So you're not just studying Manchu China, you're the Manchu emperor and you're negotiating. Well, right now they're all on paper. What happens when somebody can recreate it so it feels as good as World of War or whatever everyone's playing, so that you're actually in Manchu China and you're behaving as the emperor? I think we will reach that world, and it will transform the humanities. And from where we're sitting, it will really open up this accessibility, because a lot of the humanities are based on very small classes having access to limited materials. Putting manuscripts online and putting artifacts online, putting archaeological digs online changes everything.
Well, with that forward-looking comment and question, thank you very much to all of our panelists for being here tonight. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight.